All right, I promised I would bring you a video about Diodorus Siculus' writings about Ethiopia and Ethiopians because black people see that Ethiopia and Ethiopians are mentioned in the Bible over and over again, and because Ethiopia today is considered an all-black country or an all-black nation of people, Ethiopia was actually a massive area that entailed many different types of people, white and black. And so the Bible, when it mentions Ethiopians, is talking about white people. It's not talking about the black Ethiopians. I'm going to show you proof of that here, just based on what is written, and then using your own logic, you'll easily be able to deduce that they were talking about the white Ethiopians each time they mention Ethiopians in the Bible. God is trying to win back our lost white people. This is many years before Christ. And what he was doing is he was interacting with Ethiopia regularly, interacting with Ethiopians regularly through sending his other people there who follow him already, and various different reasons or methods that he used to interact with them. But he was trying to win them back to godliness. They were lost white people. They were pagans, and I'll be able to show you that here, that they actually worshipped Greek gods, which proves that they were white. Blacks had no knowledge of Greek gods. They had no concept of any of that. Also, the white Ethiopians were circumcised, which you will also be able to read here. And they declare that Egypt is simply a group of their people who went off to explore, and then that group of their people who broke off from them and went to explore founded Egypt. And they declare that all the Egyptians are circumcised as well, as does Diodorus Siculus here in his writing. He confirms the same thing. So it wasn't just their say-so to Diodorus that Egyptians were circumcised, but that Diodorus himself also confirmed the same thing, and many others have too. And of course, we know that the mummies of the pharaohs who've been exhumed have all turned out to be European white people with white people hair. And I almost accidentally said the word Caucasian because it's so impregnated into our mind, but we are not Caucasians, okay? We have nothing to do with Asians. We're not Asian, all right? Asians are beasts, and we do not have anything to do with them. The Caucasus Mountains are simply a location that we traveled through and stayed in for a short period, and then left there and traveled back southwestwardly into what is now known as Europe. But we did not come from there. We did not stay there all of our lives or originate from there. And that's what the whole concept of Caucasians is all about. It's an insult to white people. It's basically to get you to believe in evolution and all this. Evolution, of course, is Jewry nonsense, fictional Jewry. And so they want you to believe that we evolved from monkeys. And I'll show you in another video where every time they show monkeys evolving into a person, which of course is Jewish fables, but when they show that, they always show a monkey evolving into a white person. They'll show a monkey next to a white person to talk about comparisons of evolution. They will never, ever, ever show monkeys evolving into Oprah or Chuck D or any other black person because they're afraid that they would be attacked by the blacks for, just like when Harambe was shot, what did all the blacks immediately do? They all jumped on TV. Don't y'all dare start making racist comments about our people. So they already know that they're the ones who created the Harambe meme. No white person even had thought of that, and the blacks just came out on TV and started pointing the finger at white people saying, don't you be talking about Harambe about us, and all this. And that's why that whole meme took off and exploded in the white world, because we weren't even thinking of that. It was the black people's idea that got us to even, think of it like that. And so we thought that was so funny that they themselves, when they see a gorilla be killed, they think, oh, white people are going to make fun of us now. It's funny that they themselves are who attach themselves to the whole monkey, orangutan, gorilla concept. And then, of course, we have the Jewish fables that tell us to believe that all of us came from evolution and monkeys and all this stuff, which is total nonsense. But this isn't about arguing with you whether or not you want to be a pagan or you want to believe in Jewish scientism, which is a total lie. But anyway, if you want to believe in that, fine. I'm just going to let you see here. The point of this topic is that we are reading Diodorus Siculus' report about Ethiopia and Ethiopians that lived in Ethiopia. And so I want to stick with that, and but again, there are certain things. The reason I brought paganism up and all those things is because, and circumcision is because it proves that a lot of Egypt, the north part, or not Egypt, the north part of Ethiopia was all white people. And then the further west and the further south and the further east you go from the north bulk region of Ethiopia, you start running into the non-whites. So I'm going to just highlight some things. I'm not going to read all this. It's about 38 chapters. I'm not going to read really any of it other than some bullet point highlights I want to show you. And in this first paragraph here, but please do read this whole thing, and I'll provide you links in the description for you all to go and read this entire 38 chapters for yourself. But I want you to point out, or I want you to notice certain things as I point them out. And this first 7 paragraphs that you're going to see here, the first 7 paragraphs of Volume 3 of Diodorus Siculus' writings, are about the white Ethiopians who live in the north. So, the very first ones he mentions here are the autochthones, however you want to pronounce that. And you can even deduce by logic of reading how they lived and how they conducted themselves that they were white people, because they don't live like black people lived. They went by nobility and honor and all these things. And I'll highlight that more as we get further into this, but I just wanted to start you off with that understanding. And so you'll see here toward the bottom of this first this paragraph number 2 here, as you get closer to the bottom, let's look at 5 lines up from the bottom of this paragraph 2. You'll see that, well, let's go 4 lines up from the bottom. As witness to this, they call upon the poet who is perhaps the oldest and certainly the most venerated among the Greeks, for in the Iliad he represents both Zeus and the rest of the gods with him as absent on a visit to Ethiopia to share in the sacrifices and the banquet, which were given annually by the Ethiopians for all the gods together. So, here we have Ethiopians who would create a feast, a gathering, a banquet every year, and sacrifices for the pagan gods. That this is a batch of our bad ancestors from way, way, way back in the day before Christ, who had defected from godlyhood, had lost their identity, and now God has downtrodden them. He's got them to live like savages, and not like savages fully, but they still lived in honor and had all these proper ways of conducting themselves with nobility. But it was a manufactured morality. God is who establishes true morality. And so what you'll be reading here is a manufactured, a mankind version of morality. And so have yourself read further down here. I'll try to stop every now and then and let you guys look and just pause and read if you wish. But the very fact that these Ethiopians being discussed here honored and gave festivals and sacrifices to the pagan gods of the Greeks shows that they had that they were white, and that they had the white people inclination to follow pagan gods after they had, and of course that was probably a practice that drove them to end up living in Ethiopia. They probably didn't come from there, even though they believed that they did. And you'll see that further in their writings here, that they declare they came from there, that they spawned from there, from the earth. that the gods created them and put them there first. And maybe they're right. Maybe God actually had a group of, I'm not saying maybe they're right that they spawned from there, but maybe a group of them that defected from godlyhood. God ventured them down to that way somehow, and even though they believe they came from there, they're actually there, placed there on purpose by God, driven to that land to keep them separate from other places and separate from other ungodly white people, so that they wouldn't corrupt the other godly white people. And of course, that's all just speculation. I'm just giving you ways of looking at this with logic, as opposed to just blatantly or blankly reading it and accepting everything for as it's written, which I still want you to do that also, because this man writes very articulate. He's a very detailed guy. He did many of these observations himself, and he challenges people to compare his writings with other historians who wrote about these same people. So, sorry I've taken so long to get going here, but I just wanted to set it all up for you while we're looking at all of this. And I'm going to just point out highlights, like I said. Now, first you're going to see that he's writing about the area of North Ethiopia, where these people lived. And you'll see that, I'm trying to find a couple of the highlights here. I can't really highlight things on the screen, because as soon as I change tabs and then come back to it, all the highlights are gone, and it even moves it to another part of the screen, which is dumb. I don't know why Apple does that. Just Apple garbage, go figure. But so what I wanted to show you here in these highlights is that they indeed were circumcised, that they indeed kept themselves similar to how Egyptians did, as far as they honored the gods that, they were following, the pagan gods they were following at the time, and they conducted themselves in an orderly manner. And when you read about the black Ethiopians in here, the testimony about them, or the observation about them, will be that they lived nothing like humankind, and that they did not go by honor or concern themselves with life, death, or any kind of thing like that. So we'll keep on looking here. I want you to see the rest of this about it. Now, you'll see here at the beginning of paragraph 4, line 1, we must now speak about the Ethiopian writing, which is called hieroglyphic among the Egyptians. So this proves that Ethiopian writing was the same as Egyptian writing, and Egyptians called it hieroglyphic. Ethiopians probably had a different word, but they're one and the same, and that's why they're easily comparing the Ethiopian writing with Egyptian writing. Because if it was something completely different than Egyptian writing and nothing like hieroglyphics, Egyptians wouldn't bother calling it hieroglyphics. They would call it some other language of some other mysterious people. But instead, they recognized it as hieroglyphics, the same as theirs, and thus they called Ethiopian writing hieroglyphics, as it states in paragraph 4, line 1. And it goes on to explain hieroglyphics to some degree, which is good, because this gave us understandings of how to interpret. I mean, this guy lived hundreds of years before Christ, and he's reporting these things. So that was a great way for our historians in modern times to be able to learn the code and the language of hieroglyphics. Now, we're going to get into how they live now. The white Ethiopians that live in North Ethiopia. I'm finally to it. Here we go. Paragraph 5. As for the customs of the Ethiopians, not a few of them are thought to differ greatly from those of the rest of mankind. That means quite a few of them, actually. Not a few of them means not very little of them. So in other words, quite a bit of them are thought to differ greatly from those of the rest of mankind. This being especially true of those which concern the selection of their kings. The priests, for instance, first choose out of the noblest men from their own number. There's nobility, there's our honor and dignity structure that white people concern themselves with, that blacks and others did not. And so this right here proves that they were white, but it continues on. And whichever one from this group the god may select, as he is borne about in a procession in accordance with a certain practice of theirs. Him the multitude take for their king, and straightway it both worships and honors him like a god, meaning the multitude who have established him as the king, believing that the sovereignty has been entrusted to him by divine providence. That is something white people do when we are pagans. That's how we roll. Non-whites didn't roll that way. That's just not how they did things. But white people did, which this is just all proving these people are white. And the king who has been thus chosen both follows a regimen which has been fixed in accordance with the laws and performs all his other deeds in accordance with the ancestral custom, according neither favor nor punishment to anyone contrary to the usage which has been approved among them from the beginning. So this is hanging on to tradition, honor, dignity, which creates their version of nobility. This is how white people have always functioned outside. When we break away and lose our identity and we start to have to create our own moral structure and own moral conduct, this is how we do it every time. It is also a custom of theirs that the king shall put no one of his subjects to death. Does that sound like black people? Pfft. Not even if a man shall be condemned to death, and it is considered deserving of his punishment, but that he shall send to the transgressor one of his attendants, bearing a token of death. And the guilty person, on seeing this warning, immediately retires to his home and removes himself from life. Does that sound like any non-white you've ever heard of, other than maybe some Asians might have a form of honor similar to that in, say, Japan? But this level of dignity and honor, even though it's manufactured by mankind, is our white people's structure of dignity and honor when we have lost our identity and we go into creating our own way of life. This is how we do things. We create order. We follow it, the order from the beginning that was established. We consider it divine providence to do so. We consider our kings to be sovereign. We consider their sovereignty to be God-given. And all these things that we used to do when we were in transgression, that's what we thought. And so that's how we behaved, and non-whites did not behave this way. This confirms over and over and over again. With each line of this, it's confirming that northern Ethiopians, the giant majority bulk of the north and central section of Ethiopia, were white people. Moreover, for a man to flee from his own into a neighboring country, thus by moving away from his native land to pay the penalty of his transgression, as is the custom among the Greeks. So Greeks could actually leave their country if they were sentenced to death as a punishment. They could actually just leave. They could exile themselves, and that would be that. They could escape death by exiling themselves and never returning. But the sentence continues on. Is permissible under no circumstances. In other words, no one of these white Ethiopians of this northern kingdom were ever allowed to, and they would not try to leave their town or their country to escape the death penalty that had been issued down by the king. Consequently, they say, when a man to whom the token of death had been sent by the king once undertook to flee from Ethiopia, and his mother, on learning of this, she would bound his neck about with her girdle, he dared not so much as raise his hand against her in any way, but submitted to be strangled until he died, that he might not leave a greater disgrace to his kinsmen. Now does it sound like a white people group? Told you. Only white people hold themselves to this level of honor among each other. Doesn't matter that it's manufactured, that it's man-made and not God-inspired. The fact is, this is how white people conduct themselves, all right? When they are in various forms of trying to maintain their nobility and their customs and their traditions. Of all their customs, the most astonishing is that which obtains in connection with the death of their kings. For the priests at Meroe, who spend their time in the worship of the gods, and the rites which do them honor, being the greatest and most powerful order, whenever the idea comes to them, dispatch a messenger to the king with orders that he die. For the gods, they add, have revealed this to them, and it must be that the command of the immortals should in no wise be disregarded by one of the mortal frame, meaning none of them, not even the king, was allowed to disregard what the group of the highest priests believed they were told by the gods. And this order they accompany with other arguments, such as are accepted by a simple-minded nature, which has been bred in a custom that is both ancient and difficult to eradicate, and which knows no argument that can be set in opposition to commands enforced by no compulsion. So what they're saying here is there is no way to argue your way out of their simple argument. They come to the person with a simple argument. They come to the king with a simple argument. The gods have told us, now is your time to expire. The gods have told us, you should have fed those people last weekend when they were hungry. Our gods now say it's time for you to off yourself. Whatever the case may be, no mortal could give a good argument against it. It wouldn't have mattered what argument you made. It was not considered anywhere remotely close to good enough of an argument to be opposition to the command enforced, which is that they must off themselves, step down and off themselves. Now, in former times, the kings would obey the priests, having been overcome, not by arms nor by force, but because their reasoning powers had been put under a constraint by their very superstition. But during the reign of the second Ptolemy, the king of the Ethiopians, I'm not going to try to say this name, let's try it. I'll try it anyway. Ergamenes is probably how you say it, Ergamenes, who had had a Greek education and had studied philosophy, was the first to have the courage to disdain the command. For assuming a spirit which became the position of a king, he entered with his soldiers into an unapproachable place where stood, as it turned out, the golden shrine of the Ethiopians, put the priests to the sword, and after abolishing this custom thereafter, ordered affairs after his own will. So eventually this Greek-educated, this Greek-trained king took over, and it was during the reign of the second Ptolemy. But this king's name, Ergamenes, decided, screw all this tradition. You're not just going to tell me to kill myself whenever you decide to, or whenever you just up and think that your gods think that about me. I don't follow this nonsense, and even though I'm your leader and you people believe all this, I'm the leader now, and I'm abolishing all of that. So he slaughtered all of the kings, or all of the priests, and then established a new order of law under his own desires. So here we go, chapter 7. As for the custom touching the friends of the king, strange as it is, it persists, they said, down to our time. So after he established this new way he did things, it continued all the way to Diodorus Siculus' time, which must have been maybe 100 or so years later that he was writing about before his time. For the Ethiopians have the custom, they say, that if their king has been maimed in some part of his body through any cause whatever, all his companions suffer the same loss of their own choice, because they consider that it would be a disgraceful thing if, when the king had been maimed in his leg, if his friends should be sound of limb, And if their goings forth from the palace, they should not all follow the king limping as he did. For it would be strange that steadfast friendship should share sorrow and grief and bear equally all other things, both good and evil, but should have no part in the suffering of the body. So they were saying that anytime the king, whoever was king at the time, would suffer a physical ailment of any type, all of the king's men would damage their own selves, their own bodies, in a similar fashion, so that they would never be walking tall and well while their king limps, or so that they would have an injured left arm just like their king did. And they didn't want to have any physical trait better than their sovereign king. And so that is why they would voluntarily pick, if the king had multiple physical damage all of a sudden, like say he got in some crazy horse riding accident, or he was in a battle and he got damaged multiple places, they could pick an injury of their choosing. And being white people and highly honorable as best they could be under paganism, that they would have picked the worst of the damages the king suffered in order to inflict themselves with, so that they would be as equally inflicted as their king, so they would not show any physical superiority over their king, who they're supposedly supposed to share all good and bad, both benefits and suffering with. Carrying on. They say also that it is customary for the comrades of the kings even to die with them of their own accord, meaning of their own will, and that such a death is an honorable one and proof of true friendship. Do you know any non-whites that would do that? You know any blacks that would do that? That's the bottom line here. We're discussing whether or not blacks were Ethiopians. Do you know any blacks that would kill themselves to follow their homeboy because he died? No. Do you know any blacks that would injure themselves to be as injured as a black who's above them in leadership? Heck no. They would use that as an immediate weakness to exploit and try to conquer the other black king. So, of course, this whole detail is of nobility and honor, though manufactured by white people. It's obvious. I'm getting ahead of myself here. Let me scroll back. And we're about to get to the good part here. So I'm hope you stuck around, because we're literally about to get to the blacks now. Okay, so. And it is for this reason, they add, that a conspiracy against the king is not easily raised among the Ethiopians. So see, it was pretty slick of them that if the king got injured, they would all have to injure themselves. And anyone who didn't willingly injure themselves would be looked at by the entire rest of the community as dishonorable. So they would be imposed to injure themselves in order to stay equally damaged with the king and everyone else of the men of the tribe at the time. All his friends being equally concerned for both his safety, meaning the king's, and their own. So this system they had set up would keep anyone from ever wanting the king damaged, because God forbid the king loses one of his legs. Well, now you got to lose a leg. So nobody wanted the king to be damaged whatsoever, and this caused conspiracies to rise and coups to be difficult to rise against any particular king of the Ethiopians. Okay, the Bible keeps talking about. Now, these then are the customs which prevail among the Ethiopians who dwell in their capital. That's the leadership city of Ethiopia, and of those who inhabit both the island of Meroe and the land adjoining Egypt. So there were other white folks that lived just outside of the north in other areas, and that is how all of them lived. Now you get to hear the difference between the Ethiopians proper into the north and the blacks of Ethiopia that lived back then. Chapter 8. But there are also a great many other tribes of the Ethiopians, some of them dwelling in the land lying on both banks of the Nile and on the islands in the river. others inhabiting the neighboring country of Arabia, and still others residing in the interior of Libya. The majority of them, and especially those who dwell along the river, are black in color. Why didn't he mention that before? Now, because the ones he was talking about before weren't. They were men. They were white people that looked and acted and functioned like other white people did. Even though he said they lived totally different than other white people in other nations, they still functioned like white people with manufactured nobility, manufactured honor, manufactured dignity. Okay? Blacks have no concept of that, and you're about to see here why. The majority of them, and especially those who dwell along the river, are black in color and have flat noses and woolly hair. Doesn't say their hair is like wool, white like wool, okay? Because they don't have white hair. And white hair is described as white like wool, white like sheep's wool. That's not what woolly means in this sentence. Woolly in this sentence means squirrely. Tight little curls, super tight little curls. That's what it means here. Afro, that's what it means. As for their spirit, they are entirely savage and display the nature of a wild beast. Wild beast, okay? Because that's what they are. Not so much, however, in their temper, as in their ways of living. For they are squalid all over their bodies. They keep their nails very long like the wild beasts. Haven't you ever seen ghetto chicks? You see how they keep their fingernails and their toenails in disgusting lengths? And let me just go back here. I just want to read this whole sentence again. I'm sorry I butted into that. As for their spirit, they are entirely savage and display the nature of a wild beast, not so much, however, in their temper as in their ways of living. For they are squalid all over their bodies. They keep their nails very long like the wild beasts, and are as far removed as possible from human kindness to one another. Does that sound like nobility or morals or righteousness or any type, manufactured or otherwise? And speaking as they do with a shrill voice, and cultivating none of the practices of civilized life. None of the practices of civilized life. As these are found among the rest of mankind. Why? Because they're not mankind. They're beasts. That's why. They don't cultivate any of the practices of civilized life that is found in mankind. They present a striking contrast when considered in the light of our own customs, meaning white people's customs, meaning Diodorus Siculus' people's customs. And then he goes on to detail blacks and how they hunted, how they fished, what they used. And so now I'm not going to go further into that. What I'm going to show you now is I'm going to scroll through these chapters and I'm going to show you that he talks about different tribes within Ethiopians. And I'm going to explain to you which tribe is which. And then when you read for yourself these paragraphs, which I really hope you do, I'll give you the links in the description. I hope you click on them and read this all for yourself in its entirety. When you go back and read these, you will see that my bullet points here of who are white and who are black will perfectly be in accordance with logic. Okay, and a couple of them he even describes that they're black later on, but some of these will be obvious, and I'll explain why as we move along. So you can go ahead and read all you like here about, just pause and give this a read if you want, if you don't want to have to click on the link or whatever. And here we go again. Now, right here, this paragraph, underneath paragraph 8, or chapter 8, I'm sorry. Underneath chapter 8, the second paragraph here of chapter 8 is talking about the black Ethiopians and how they conducted themselves or whatever, as far as how they dealt with animal skins and if they covered themselves and whatnot. And an interesting thing is that it says that they ate milk and cheese. If you read the last line here of the second paragraph of chapter 8, you'll see that they ate milk and cheese. So it's questionable whether this actual paragraph here is actually describing the blacks, even though he just mentioned them in the beginning of the first chapter of section 8, chapter 8 here. But this is kind of, and another thing is the bows of wood. They used bows, and blacks aren't really known for making bow and arrows, and they don't process milk and cheese well. So it could be that Diodorus Siculus just mentioned the blacks here in paragraph 1 of chapter 8 here, and then possibly he's reverted back to talking about the northern Ethiopians who are white. And I know you might see this thing of custom of wearing a bronze ring in the lip, which is 5 lines down from the top. That could be just an earring size ring perpendicular through the lip, like what we see white kids sometimes do nowadays when they are, being rebellious and poking holes in their face. That could have been the type of ring they're talking about. It doesn't necessarily mean a giant plate that the whole entire bottom lip circumnavigates, So that even could be because of the fact that they lived on milk and cheese and meat, and they had bows and arrows, that he is reverting back to the North white Ethiopians for that particular paragraph. And the other reason I say that is because you will see in other parts of here, sometimes he will toggle back and forth from the north to the south. It's rare, but there are a couple times he does it. So here we go. We're going to move on to the next part here. And this is of definitely talking about the whites again, which is why it makes sense that it could be that he's talking about them here as well, because he goes right back to talking about white Ethiopians who lived in the north. And it says, with regard to the gods, the Ethiopians who dwell above Meroe entertain 2 opinions. Some of them believe that the sun and the moon and the universe as a whole are eternal and cannot perish. And the other half of them thought of all things to be mortal, and that all things would perish, including the sun, the moon, and earth, and other things. But you'll notice here on the 5th line down that they revere Isis and Pan, and also Heracles and Zeus. So this is a group of people who are literally following and making sacrifices every year, or having a feast every year, and welcoming these pagan gods who are they're based on white people's beliefs. There are no blacks that followed white people gods back then. They didn't even know about them. They had no knowledge of them. And then there are some Ethiopians who are white here. It says beginning at the last 3 lines toward the end of the third from the bottom line of that top paragraph, but a few of the Ethiopians do not believe in the existence of any gods at all. Consequently, at the rising of the sun, they utter imprecations against it as being most hostile to them, and they flee to the marshes of those parts. So, there were some atheists, there were some people who cursed the sun. They knew it brought heat that was deathly to people if they weren't prepared and had water and had shade. And so there were, white people back then who had so far defected that they were all the way atheist. We're going to continue on here, and I said that we were getting into the bullet points of the different groups, but he just hasn't quite hit that yet, and I realize why now. It's because he doesn't actually get to that on this tab. I actually have to go to the second tab, which is the second portion of these chapters, and then that will start describing the different tribes among the Ethiopians, and then I'll be able to, by name, and I'll be able to show you. So I'm just looking across here real quick to see if I notice anything else bullet point wise that I wanted to point out to you. And of course, sometimes I lose my train of thought about certain things I wanted to show because there's just so much to all of this, Now, here's another interesting part of the read that you may want to look into. the bottom paragraph I'm showing there where it says number 5, they talk about these gigantic serpents that lived in those times back then and could take entire elephants down and whatnot. And of course, we know that giant serpents still exist. We find them sometimes in South Florida, which is in America, and then we find them, of course, over in the Amazon and other places. So large serpents do exist, very, very large ones do exist, and I'm sure back in the day, extremely large ones probably existed. And due to the necessity of survival, we probably exterminated them almost totally, to keep ourselves safe back then. And for meat, I'm sure plenty of them ate them and whatnot. But I'm going to go ahead and let you just pause and read the rest of this if you want, because honestly, the rest of this page is not all of that critical for the subject at hand in this instant matter, what we're making a video about. But I want you to see the rest of this just so you have an opportunity to read it effortlessly without having to click the link, go anywhere on some other tab. And another thing that I have wanted to point out here is that they did mercilessly work slaves back in the day. And so slavery was absolutely a thing among our people, but you'll notice that it was people who had been convicted of a crime. All right? And sometimes their whole family would be brought. Let me scroll back to that so you can see again. Some of their whole family would be brought in as punishment with them. So like, you know how we're always saying, oh, blame the parents, blame the parents. Well, they really followed that back then. And so if a white person did something very heinous or despicable or whatever, then sometimes the family would be thrown into slavery for punishment along with the white person who committed the actual act. So, and they had, and you can see here, I'll bring it up to the top of the screen, halfway across the top of the screen, for no leniency or respite of any kind is given to any man who is sick or maimed or aged, or in the case of a woman for her weakness, but all without exception are compelled by blows to the back and to the legs, I'm sure, to persevere in their labors until through ill treatment they die in the midst of their tortures. So they were never given sleep day or night. They weren't given rest. They had basically, if you were convicted of a crime and sentenced to, say, life or whatever in the slavery of construction or the mining, then that was it. Once you were sent to the mines as a convict, you were going to work to your death, period, dot. So basically, pretty much any crime that would sentence you to such a punishment was a sentence to death. Only you were tortured by way of merciless, non-stop slaving labor before you died. And so that is how our people rolled against our criminals back then. Not our people, but a portion of our people, a group of our lost white people. That is how they ruled over their people and kept people from committing crimes, which, funny enough, a lot of people would accuse other people of committing crimes and would frame other people of committing crimes, and that caused many innocent people to also be thrown in and into this thing of slavery. And so that caused a great multitude of people. And of course, you know, anytime they would conquer people and whatnot, they would bring them back also as slaves. So the great multitude of slaves they had came from not only criminals, but people they conquered and people who were falsely accused. Now that was all of that page. So now we're going to get into the bullet points of the different people. As you can see on line 1 here, they already got a name ready for us in the first one. And I'll let you know that this first group here, and each paragraph will be about the name mentioned at the top of the paragraph, as makes sense. So the very first name here, the Ethiophagi, they were black. And as you read down through this, you'll see that they lived by having a pile of stones on this watery area that during high tide, the water would come in. It would bring in a bunch of fish with it. Then when the tide would go away, the fish would be stuck on the rocks and in the little crooks and ravines and jagged areas. And they would get trapped in all that. And then these people, after low tide would come, they would rush in and they would happily gather up all of the fish. And so they lived very well off of that and really needed for nothing else. That's how they lived. And it has two, let's see. And actually, real quick, I want to set you up another thing about this this group here, the Ethiophagi. Phagi at the end means eaters. And then anything before ophagi means whatever thing they were eating. So in this case, Ethiophagi means fish eaters, if you will. And so there are several paragraphs about these particular people, and then he will move on to another group. So I will go ahead and scroll on down. And of course, you know, like I said, please pause and read all this anytime. And he did write quite a bit about these folks, actually. Trying to find the next group. And you'll see here, let me just bring this up real quick. Top of the page you're looking at here, halfway across the screen. Consequently, they say, they speak no language, but by movements of the hands which describe each object, they point out everything they need. So this is another proof they weren't white. They were just people who, you know, they functioned on just moving their hands and making noises and whatnot. I'm just going to scroll back up here real quick and make sure I didn't miss any of the other part. No, I didn't. So we're going to go ahead and scroll on down, and I'm going to find the next group here. Yeah, see, it's even mentioning them here still, top row there. And so what he's done is he's described these 4 types of habitation, 3 up to this point, and now at the top of your screen he's going into the 4th kind of habitation that this particular people, or beast I should say, lived in status-wise. And so, and then here he mentions them again in paragraph 20. Go ahead and have a read about that if you like. Then we get into, finally, we get into the next group of people. And they were called the let's see. Whew, that's a tough one, huh? Kelanophagi. Boy, that's a tongue twister. Kelanophagi. And the Kelanophagi, they ate some other thing. I don't remember what it was, but there are footnotes at the bottom of both these pages. These are the turtle eaters. That's what it is. So these are white people, and one of the reasons you can tell they're white people is they knew how to swim. And also they lived orderly, and they used the way their process of capturing these gigantic sea turtles was very orderly, and you had to swim to be able to do so, which kind of excludes anything but white people at this point and the way they functioned. And also, if I scrolled back up, which I won't do, but if you read the parts that I had already shown up above this part on this page, you'll see that the Ichthyophagi, they had no concept of water going or seafaring. They did not have any concept of boats. And it says that in words up above. I just didn't find that part and show it. But here you'll see that these folks actually did use the turtle shells as boats. They would, I was going to zoom in on the part that says overturned boats there on the far left, but that's actually not there. He's just talking about the appearance of them there. But they would actually turn these over. And you can read further down in here that they would use them as a vessel, as a ship. So here at the bottom of this paragraph, this top paragraph, you see that their food gave them food, vessel, house, and ship, because they would use the shell as a boat or as a shield, as a cover from the rain, as a shelter top, a rooftop for a small tent-like shelter. And so those were white folks. Now that is the mixed, or the, not the mixed, I don't want to say that. That is the, I believe, the fourth of the Ethiopian people. And so he's concluding here in this short sentence that that is them and that he is done mentioning them. So there was one group who are white, and they were called the I can't say it. Whew, that's too much of a tongue twister, but you get what I'm saying. So anyway, we're going to move on. He goes into talking about another area where people reside, and he gets it, and he doesn't name this tribe. So I just to say to you here that this paragraph you're looking at on the screen at the top is of another tribe of people, and they are not named, but they are white by reason of logic, you can tell, because of this very intricate way of catching fish that they had arranged. They had created hinged doors inside these woven walls that they would submerge into the water, and as the tide would come in, the hinge would allow the doorways to open, fish would go through, pass through the wallway easily, and then of course when the tide drew back, the fish would be trapped because the doors would close by reason of the hinges, and the fish would all be trapped, and then they could come in and gather the massive multitude of fish for the day. Moving on, there was a group called the Rhizophagi. Okay, here they are on the top line in the center of the screen, Rhizophagi, and they were black. And have a read about them if you like. And go ahead and scroll along. Next, we had two groups of people called the Hilophagi, and they were black, and the Spermatophagi. And the spermatophagi doesn't mean they ate jizz. It means they ate fruits. They ate seeds. They were seed eaters. And sperm, seed, they used them interchangeably. So these were seed eaters. And the Hilophagi, I forgot what they eat. But you can read here what they eat. It says it right here. I've read all of this about 3 or 4 times. And I'm just trying to go off memory of things as I go here. The next group here is halfway across the top line, a little more than halfway, the Synagogue or Synagogue. And they were, by reason it's inconclusive, actually. I couldn't really determine by logic one way or the other. I want to say these folks are white because they were excellent marksmen, and they used bows. So that typically would mean that they were white people, but I cannot confirm that with them for sure. So we'll move on from them, but that is the Synagogue or Synagogue or whatever. Next group is the Simi, S-I-M-I, and they are black, were black if they don't exist anymore, which I'm sure they don't. They were black. The next group was the Strathophagi, and the Strathophagi are white. And so what they did is they were elephant hunters, but they did so in a clever manner. And what they would do is they would saw a tree. And, well, I'm not quite there yet, so let me just get on down through here. Actually, no, this was the group that did that. Let me see, let me go back up here. Somehow I got myself twisted up here only a little bit, though, only barely. Because these elephant hunter people, they were... So these elephant hunter type ones may have been black folks. Okay, they may have been blacks. But there was this other group that would trick elephants. They would capture elephants easily, and the way they did it is they would discover trees. They would follow the tracks of elephants and discover what trees an elephant liked to lean up against, to sleep against, or scratch themselves against. And when they would discover which trees those were, they would saw the bottom of the tree, making it very weak. And so when the elephant came over to lean against the tree would fall. And as the tree fell, elephant would fall over with it. The Ethiopian, I forget which group they were, they would rush in and they would immediately, kill the thing and start butchering it. Now, here is the semi mentioned up top line there. And the second line goes right into, but those towards the south are held by the tribe of the Strathophagi. Man, it's so crazy. Okay, and the Strathophagi are the ones who they lived off ostrich. All right, and so it describes here in a whole paragraph about the ostrich. And they were constantly at war with the Semi, who lived nearby, who were black. So it figures the blacks, you'll see here, let me scroll it up, the very top line, the Semi, they were in daily peril from the Semi. I'll scroll it back one more here. So top line, part of the way across, but being constantly warred upon by the Ethiopians, known as Semi, they are in daily peril from their attackers. Boy, doesn't that sound like what white people deal with today? Anywhere we try to live peacefully, anywhere remotely close to them, isn't that exactly what we deal with today? And they use as defensive weapons the horns of gazelles. These horns, being large and sharp, are of great service and are found in abundance throughout the land by reason of the multitude of animals which carry them. So, that's that about them. We're moving on to the next group, which is the Acrodophagi. The Acrodophagi, or Acrodophagi. And they were black. So they locusts, and what happened is the locusts would come down to their land every year. They would start a great brush fire, and the smoke, as the locusts would fly through the smoke, quickly as they flew into the smoke would immediately overtake them. They would all fall to the ground, and they end up with giant piles. It says great heaps of them were formed from the falling locusts from the sky flying through the smoke. And they would mix them with a capturing of brine that they did in another manner, and they would mix them together and create food with them that they could also preserve and eat later on, and all these other things. Moving on, the authority, or the authority, were white people, and I'm trying to make sure here that I haven't passed them already. I'm looking for them. They're usually almost every time the name is at the top of the paragraph, and then the paragraph is the explanation of those people. So just want to make sure I haven't passed any of them. Okay, so somewhere right here, even though I'm not seeing it, is the... here we go. Right here by the number 38. Okay, so they just kind of threw it in the middle of this one. And so let's go here, right there. And go ahead and have a read about the Authority, and see what you think about them. They were white. And I'm going to move on to this next group here. And the Greeks called these people the Cynomolgi, or Cynomolgi. But the barbarians who lived near to these people being spoke about knew them as the Agrii, or Agri, or Agri. And they wore great beards. Read at number 40 and start there at the top line at the end there, the closer side of the page where number 40 is. Start reading there. They wear great beards and maintain packs of savage dogs. Does that sound like blacks? Of course not. That's what white people have always done. We've always maintained, many of our people back in the day maintained great beards, and our people were were masters of dogs. We have always had packs of dogs to do our bidding, to help us with hunting, to help us with wrangling cattle and herds of sheep. And so this can tell you for sure that these folks were white, and they used their dogs for all the manner of things that we use them for, to hunt and wrangle and everything like we do today. And you don't see packs of Arabs using, or you don't see tons of Arabs and Asians and Spanish and blacks using packs of dogs, especially in the past. They wouldn't even go near dogs in the past. Dogs hated their guts, would eat them anyway. So only white people were ever really masters over dogs and utilized them in such a manner. And really only white people ever had massive flocks and herds that needed to be wrangled by dogs, and that needed to be, moved from one thing to another, as far as migrating from one place to another for feeding times of the year, seasons of the year, with dogs. White people were pretty much the only people that ever did so. The troglodytes, here on top of the screen, they're white, and I don't remember all the things about them, but they lived off of a concoction of animal blood and milk. And so that was their way of nutrition, even though it's probably not the correct way to live, since we're not supposed to drink blood. And they had eunuchs among them that they called Kolobi, or Kolobi, or however you want to pronounce that. And so that's the troglodytes, and he goes into a little bit more about them here. But one of the groups of the troglodytes, particularly called the ones called the Megabari, or Megabari, however you want to pronounce it, they had round shields covered with raw oxhide and a club with iron knobs. That sounds like white people. Only white people have made shields, while everyone else just hides behind trees and whatever. White people were famous for thousands of years, before Christ even, as making shields, utilizing shields. And we had things like clubs with knobs and spikes and nails and thorns on them, so that when we would hit people, it would hurt. Way worse than just the blunt object impact itself. And they had bows and arrows and lances. And they practiced burial. So that's not something that blacks do. Blacks didn't bury their dead. That was only a thing white people did for the most part. And so that is the Megabari, or Megabari, however you would like to pronounce that. And that is the total collection I have for you on the folks who are listed here as being Ethiopians in Ethiopia by Diodorus Siculus. All right, so I'll leave you the links in the description, and I hope that all of you go and read them all for yourself. And there are many more writings of Diodorus Siculus. He also writes about the Scythians, which I might do in another video coming up. Scythians are white people. And so be nice to read about them as well. Strabo is another person who wrote about a lot of these people in the past, so you can confirm things that were written by Diodorus, by Strabo, and others. And I might even get into showing them on another day, but just wanted you to at least see these for now, because we already know that yes, 40 here savages, our people were called savages, nicknamed savages, by a group of other white people. And so, in case you saw that there, yes, that is talking about our white people in that particular reference there, that particular footnote. But, since blacks are trying to, because, the grabblers have shown them that in our scriptures, Ethiopia is mentioned regularly, and Ethiopians are mentioned quite a bit. And God is trying to win them over. He's trying to conquer them. He sends his people over there to conquer them. He tries to woo them over many times, either by force or by persuasion. And whether or not they ever yielded, which apparently they never did, but eventually white people left Ethiopia, just like Detroit, just like Chicago, and blacks moved in and took it all over. So again, where white people build and then another inhabits. And that's how we know, and I'm going to make another video about another confirmation of how we know that no non-whites will be in the new earth with us. This earth is going to pass away. God is going to destroy this earth. This earth will not be our place we live for eternity. That's why they call this, that's why Christians say this place is not our home. They probably don't realize what that saying comes from. It comes from, in the Bible, it declares, in Revelation, or in Jeremiah, or Isaiah, 66:23, he says, Isaiah sees a new heavens and a new earth be created, and that's where we were placed. And he says in there that when we build, another will not inhabit. All right? And that is a thing that only white people have a problem with. We build a civilization, and then non-white beasts come and flood our nation because we stop caring about God. We stop giving God all the glory. Eventually, we stop ignoring his covenant, or we start ignoring his covenant and disregard him. And that is when God gets angry. Over and over again in the Bible, he did it to us. And he floods us with beasts. And the beasts come in and defile our women. I've already explained in other videos that there is no animal that can storm into a white society and rape our women. Okay, he's talking about upright bipeds. Beasts, he's talking about non-whites. They have access to our women. They have the ability to storm into a white area and rape our women. Okay, it also says these beasts that God floods our land with will ruin our children, will devour our children. Only non-white upright bipeds are the kind of beasts who can storm into a white society and ruin our children. They have access to our schools because their kids get to go to our schools. They get to be teachers over our white children. They get to be police at the schools of our white children. They get to be counselors and school board members over our white children at our schools. They have access to our children. They're the ones who create the curriculum that ruins the minds of our children. They are the ones who ruin our children, devour our children, as the Bible says. And that shows you right there that every time we stop following God's way, he is the one who invades us with these non-white beasts. He created them specifically for that purpose, to tempt us and to use as weapons against us to punish us every time we disregard his way. God doesn't treat blacks that way. He doesn't treat Asians that way. He doesn't treat Arabs that way. He doesn't treat anybody that way except for whites, except for white people. We are the only ones who get flooded with non-white beasts who rape our women and ruin our children every time we disregard God. That proves only we are Israel. That proves Israel are only white people. That proves only we are mankind, just like I've already explained before. So, thank you for tuning in. If you stuck along this long, God bless you, because I know that my rants take a lot to get through, and I know that sometimes I don't finish a point of a sentence before I start a new point of another sentence. I've caught that before in review of my older videos, and I'm doing my best to avoid that and to actually conclusively finish each of my sentences, each of my points. I'll get better at it. I'm just a little out of practice. After they took down my big channel back in March of 2018, I basically just put my feet up for about a year and said, heck with it, they'll just keep deleting me even if I start a new channel. And eventually I got so frustrated with misinformation going all over the internet that I just was forced to start a new channel again and get things going again. And I've been slow goings at it, and I'm out of practice, I'm a little rusty, but I'll get better again, and I'll be more concise with my statements and my articulation of the points I'm trying to get across to you. So God bless you all who made it this far. I will try to make things shorter coming up in the future and more to the point. But again, this was such a long and detailed and heavy topic, even though it's a simple subject, but there's just so much information that needed to be shown to you that it needed to take this long so that I could give you the proper information for you to be equipped with to understand. So thank you very much. I'll see you on another one. Got plenty more things coming your way, and hopefully they'll all be just as interesting to you as these are. And if you've noticed that the New York skyline is behind this in the background, see the dull gray, you can see the Twin Towers and the New York skyline. I have no idea what that has to do with Diodorus Siculus and the Library of History. Maybe the Library of History is in New York City and that's why they show that. But I just, for any of you who've been noticing that, I didn't put that there. It's on the website. You'll see it when you get there. And I will put the links in the description. If I fail to do so, remind me in the comments and I'll definitely get it in there for you so you can go to these sites directly.